What was your mindset like when you're entering the treatment center for the first time?
I mean, I really didn't believe it was possible for me to stop, but I thought maybe I can figure out how to do better, like how to
Hmm.
use less. And so it wasn't that I wanted to keep using. It was just that stopping was sort of beyond my imagination. Like I couldn't imagine that at all.
Hmm.
But I went in, I was nervous. I remember when my partner, now husband, was driving me there and I said, I don't remember deciding to do this,
Behavioral Health Integrations podcast strives to inspire the next generation of mental health and addiction specialists. Our aim is to continue to raise awareness and encourage collaboration in the mental health and addiction industry so that it will continue to thrive. There are numerous approaches to treating mental health and substance abuse issues. On this show, we take pleasure in showcasing the diversity of these approaches used to improve the lives of others. So without further ado, your host, Jacob Menig.
Mary Beth, thank you so much for being on the show. I greatly appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
For all that do not know, I found Mary Beth on LinkedIn and I just absolutely fell in love with her story and her book. Correct me if I'm wrong, From Junkie to Judge.
From Junkie to Judge, one woman's triumph over trauma and addiction.
And when I even heard that title, like perseverance came into my head because that's something I greatly honor and appreciate within the human soul and the human spirit that I feel like we all possess. And when you're the first, well, you're one of the very few judges I know, but just to come from where you came from to become a judge is simply amazing. I can't believe it.
Yeah, sometimes I say that. I mean, my story's sort of impressive, but it's a lot more impressive if you know how I started, So,
Well, just to start, like, normally I ask too, like, did you ever think you were ever going to be like a judge growing up?
No, I mean, the one positive of my life was always school. Like I
Okay.
always did well in school. I got a lot of positive attention at school. I was sort of felt seen at school and valued, which wasn't true in the rest of my life. So,
Okay.
I was brought up, I was a very blue collar girl. My mom was a secretary. My stepfather actually worked, at a steel mill. In fact, the United Steelworkers of America gave me a scholarship to help with college. So nobody in my family was really college. You didn't have a college degree, but I was sort of brought up under the assumption I would go to college. So that I knew, and being a lawyer was on my radar because I was really argumentative
Yeah.
and, and verbal. So people told me that I would make a good lawyer. So I had that sort of in my mind as a maybe, but judge, no, definitely that wasn't something that I even, dreamed about.
Oh, okay. And I gotta let my audience know, I just started listening to her book, From Junkie to Judge, and I'm sorry, I know there's more to the title, like
That's okay. That's
the
the
human
short version.
spirit.
Yeah, that's the
Um,
version.
so I really do not want to ruin it, but again, as you audience members, I'm really excited, so I might spoiler alert a couple of things. When I was like listening to your book, whatever, and just getting a general idea, would you say that you were just naturally gifted in being intelligent or smart? Like you said, you did always did really well in school. Not saying you didn't work hard, but did things academically come easy to you?
I mean, definitely when I was younger, it was easy. Most of my classes I could do I mean, I did my homework. It wasn't that I didn't do the work, but I could do the work fast. It didn't take like a large amount of my time. And I was always allowed to do things like I remember when I was in second grade, in my school, the library was organized by grade. So the books, there's the first grader books and the second grader books and
Yeah.
the third grader books. And when I was in second grade, my teacher took me to the librarian and said that I could read any book in the library. And so
Oh
that
my.
was, like sort of a moment that I remember because I was treated special because of sort of a natural attribute. And that really, made me feel noticed and seen.
Well, and another reason I bring that up because I'm kind of envious of you because I barely graduated high school with like a 1.9. But see, here's the thing, like I would like to not call myself I have ADHD, but like I tried and I barely graduated. So that's why I'm envious of people in a sense who do well in school and in that degree. So
Yeah. I mean, on the other hand, my abuse history derailed me, right? I mean, I didn't really start. I mean, I went to college. I graduated from Berkeley, but then I had 10 more years of addiction after that. And so my real life, like
yeah.
I lost, the first basically 10 plus years of what would have been my professional, development because of my substance use. So it wasn't an easy pass, but academics, that was really a strong suit for me from the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Now, growing up, were drugs and alcohol like always a part of your life and the culture? And did you get started, like, I guess, using at a somewhat young age?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't big in my family. My stepfather, who my mother married when I was 9, he drank beer mostly and some alcohol. My mother was a very minimal drinker. There were some gambling addiction problems in my family, my mother and my grandfather. But certainly it was the 70s. So in my small town area, there were a lot of drugs around. Weed, of course, was readily available. Alcohol was pretty readily available. I started with alcohol at 12. So that was my start. In fact, it was Boone's Farm Strawberry Hill wine I always mention because a lot of people know it.
And what city did you grow up in?
I grew up in Central Jersey. So I grew up in Central Jersey. Yeah. And there was a lot of acid was around. It was four-way window pane at the time, other hallucinogens, mescaline.
Four-way what? For what?
Mescaline. It's a type of it's a hallucinogen. So I didn't know of magic mushrooms until I came to college in California. In New Jersey, it was LSD and mescaline. And then when I was 16, I found methamphetamine, which was my drug of choice. And I was shooting meth within 6 months. But that was really in Central Jersey. That was the beginning of a wave of readily available meth. It hadn't been readily available before, but it was. There were biker gangs in Western Pennsylvania were making it sort of in volume for the first time. And so it was the first big wave of meth in the Central Jersey area was when I started with it in the late 70s.
Now, when you first got introduced to meth, did your family know about it, or did you do a good job keeping it a secret during your high school years?
I would suspect that my mother and my stepfather maybe knew that I was doing drugs of some kind. I don't think they knew I was shooting meth, and I did my best to hide it. On the other hand, they also weren't paying attention, right? That wasn't something they cared about. The only attention I got typically was violent attention, something, I did wrong, or you made a noise when my stepfather was trying to sleep. There was a lot of violence against me, a lot of violence against my mother, even sexual assault against me as well. So nobody was noticing if my behavior changed. They weren't interested in that. And the truth is, if they would have noticed, I don't know if they would have thought it was worth the effort to try to deal with it. It just wasn't that kind of a household.
Who was doing the abusive? Like, your mother was also being physically abused?
Yeah. I mean, when I was before my stepfather, my mother was physically abusive too, but not at the same degree as my stepfather. She married my stepfather when I was 9, and he was really violent with her, and he was violent with me. I mean, for example, when I realized who I was dealing with, and like I said, I was 9, my sister was 7, and one of our chores was emptying the dishwasher. And I taught my little sister to empty the dishwasher one dish at a time so it didn't clack. Because if you made noise, it might trigger him, and so it was sort of that level of stress and strain in the house.
It's like walking on needles and pins just to avoid the trauma, avoid the monster.
No, that's exactly right. And the other thing that I think people don't appreciate is that there wasn't a strong connection between what I did and what happened to me, and so that's just not a good way to raise a child. Children need to know, I do this and there's consequences. I don't do this and there's no consequences, right? In my house, it was a very mixed bag. It was really about what mood my stepfather was in, or what little thing might aggravate him. You could do it 20 times and it was fine. And the 21st time, it was like, the worst thing anyone did. And so the lack of connection between my behavior and what happened to me really caused me some problems later. I didn't appreciate that. I didn't know I didn't understand that my actions had an impact on my life, because when I was young, it really didn't.
And a lot of times with like trauma and abuse, like, it makes no sense. It's more of that other person's dysfunction or need of theirs that never got met. Just like as we all go through trauma, we all tend to have unmet needs as we go to adulthood. That's
right. I mean, the truth is that the problems really started almost from emotional neglect with my mother. I mean, when I was before Alan, before the, any series.
Which is abuse. Neglect is abuse. People don't want to say that. but it
It
is.
is. But I mean, like I had a lot of sort of OCD like behaviors, like when I was 4 and 5, I used to have counting behaviors and, sort of soothing behaviors. So it definitely started before him that I knew that I was sort of on my own. I didn't really have a parent, taking interest in me or protecting me. And then when you move in with a a violent person and you're already starting without that foundation, it's just, a horrible situation and it's emotionally devastating.
Alan was the first man your mother married?
No. So my biological father wouldn't marry her. And this was a big deal. I know it's hard for younger people to understand, but it's 1961. She's an Irish Catholic, unmarried, pregnant woman. This was a huge problem for her. And so for first 6 months of my life, I actually lived in a convent because she wasn't allowed to bring me home. And then she married John, who then became my sister's father. And so then I went and lived with them. She separated from John when I was 6. I lived with a great grandmother for 3 years. And then she married Alan and we moved in with the two of them. So it was already a very unstable start.
Yes. Did you still keep in contact with John to some degree?
I did, although he's gone now, but yeah, my mother divorced him when I was 6. I didn't actually see him between 13 and 53, but I would, once a year, I'd check in with him or, around the holidays or something, but it wasn't a close relationship. He really abandoned my sister, who was his biological child, and me after the divorce. We barely saw him after the divorce.
Okay. And I know you talk more about this like in the audiobook, which I highly recommend everyone gets. It's truly inspirational. You were talking about like type of physical abuse. You get an idea of the perpetrator or the predator or however you want to explain it, where we call it now fleeing, the flight response and freeze. Now there's a new term they created called fleeing, where you run, but you don't want to make the abuser angry. So you get an idea of their personality, what not to say, what not to do to tick them off to. And again, it's more on survival in a sense.
That's right. I mean, there were times where I froze, like when he sexually molested me the first time, that was a freeze reaction.
Yep.
There were times where I, tried to gauge his mood and not trigger him. But there were times when I was really angry and I would like verbally attack him, and I was smarter than he was and I could decimate him verbally. And sometimes, even though I knew I would pay for it with, physically, there was just this need to sort of stand up every once in a while and say like, I am a real person here, and I'm going to push back. So it's often that sort of, change, different approaches depending on your mood in the moment or what's been going on. But I also had a really bad, when I was in college, when I was 19, I was kidnapped by 3 men, held for 6 hours and raped. And in that situation, I was able to stay calm. And as you say, I was watching their behaviors and I was trying to understand who they were and sort of who was in charge instead of, screaming and making a scene, which was useless.
Yeah.
But that skill set, it really came from my childhood. I knew how to stay calm in the face of violence. I knew that it was important to sort of measure what their mood was, what their actions, their body language. And so I think part of the reason I survived that is because I had that skill set from the child abuse.
And I can imagine maybe in that scenario, you're planning to get a better idea, like you said, of who they were, to find a weak spot where, again, I'm not this far in the book, but to maybe escape or get out of that situation.
Yeah, I mean, there was one part in the book, and I won't give the whole thing, but where I thought about whether I could escape, but for most of the time, it was clear there was no escape. Okay. And so it was really about trying to survive because I really thought they were going to murder me. And so it was, how do I reduce my risk of being murdered? That was really the goal.
Okay, yep. Oh, yeah. I cannot imagine going through that, and just shows what an amazing, strong human being you are, and everything that you've gone through and overcame, again, is simply amazing. And when you were graduating high school, you had the thought process of, I'm great in school. And did you get valedictorian, by the way?
No, but I was in the top of my class, and I did have the highest SAT score in my class. And so, and it was for me to go to California, go to college was unusual. Only about 10 or 15% of my class went to college, and mostly it was like local schools. So for me to go to I started at UCLA, and then I transferred to Berkeley and graduated from there. Those were like really big name schools for my area. Very academically challenging schools. And so, that was really, exciting. And also I wanted to get away from home, right? So California, as far away from home as possible. So
Yes.
I went to California for college. I got as many miles between me and my household as I could.
Oh, I bet. I guess what I'm trying to say, like in the book, because you again were an active user when you graduated, but you also, I guess, according to the book and what you said, is like you didn't almost want to go to college, or you thought you didn't really have like a lot of motivation, but you knew you were kind of gonna go.
Well, I mean, I had when I was younger, I'd always, intended to go to college, but when the drugs got really bad in high school, especially my senior year, I mean, my second half of my senior year, I missed a lot of school. But colleges, they don't really see the second half grades because they already accepted you. But I was
Okay.
so strung out by the time I was going to college, I was so strung out on meth. I didn't want to go, but I couldn't think of a good excuse not to.
Yeah.
And so I got on the plane and I went because I thought I was going to fail out. I thought you are so strung out. You're in such a bad place. There's no way you're going to be able to handle college. So it wasn't
Yes.
just that I didn't want to go. It was, I thought I was going to fail and therefore I didn't want to go.
Okay. Wow. I got so many
Yeah.
questions. So what did actually end up happening? So obviously you flew there, right?
Yes. Yes.
What was the first week of college like you expected? I'm sure you had your dorm room and your roommate, right? And that whole thing.
So there was a lottery for the dorms. They only had enough rooms for like, I don't know, 80%. So I lost the lottery, but I did have an apartment with a roommate, that I
Okay.
had met like during orientation. Luckily I went there early, and to find an apartment because I needed to withdraw from the meth. And so by the time school started, it was like 2 weeks later and I was, a little bit withdrawn, at least the physical withdrawal
Yeah.
was mostly over. And so when I started at UCLA, and also again, my family doesn't have money. I had to work. So I was working half time and going to college full time. So it was a really
Wow.
challenging schedule. But when I got my first set of grades, I actually did really, really well. And so that was sort of like a relief. Okay, well, maybe I can do it. On the other hand, I always struggled with anxiety because of the trauma,
Yep.
very, negative outlook, always waiting for the worst possible thing to happen. And so I would get good grades, but by the time the grades came out, I was already in the next quarter or the next semester. And so I would think, oh, well, sure, I did well last semester, but this time I'm going to fail. Like I could never sort of absorb my success. I was always waiting
Yeah.
for the next shoe to drop, but I did do really well academically and I did better with drugs for the first 3.5 years. I didn't do great, but I did better. But with that rape, and then I moved in with a violent boyfriend, I sort of lost my grip and I started using meth again on a daily basis in January of my senior year of college. And I used until I was 32. So it was
So you stopped meth for 3 years?
I stopped. I used meth sometimes when I went home, but I was in California. There really meth wasn't as popular. I did some cocaine, I did
Okay.
other pills, I did hallucinogens, and I did a lot of alcohol, some weed. So I was using excessively, but I wasn't using at the same rate as I had been my senior year of high school until my senior year of college when I went back on meth and I used for another 10 years.
I I don't know how this sounds, but that's amazing. The fact, so what you're telling me is you worked full time. No, no, you went to school full time. You worked and were able to dabble in cocaine, marijuana, alcohol, and still did good in school.
Yeah. And more than dabbled. I mean, I used drugs every weekend, all weekend, and sometimes during the week. It was less than high school, but it was still pretty excessive. But yeah, I did. I kept a schedule. I mean, I was good about my schedule and I would use a lot of times I would just start using whatever it was Friday night. And then on Sunday, I'd stop on Sunday so I could do my homework and get ready for the week, so it's more like a 2 day sort of excessive 2 days and then 5 days of being better, excessive 2 days, 5 days of being better. So it was a new pattern for me and it was
Yeah.
an improved pattern, but there's a really strong connection between trauma and addiction, which
Yes.
today we call addiction substance use disorder. And so even though I was using less drugs, I was still had a lot of crazy behavior. I mean, I was, getting myself in dangerous situations.
Yeah.
I went to hung out of a window drunk at like 2 stories up, and I couldn't get back in, and people had to drag me in. I mean, just chaos, right? Chaos.
Yeah.
But with school, I was focused. With school, I was focused.
So when you were going to college, so just going back, you did 1 year at UCLA, then you went to Berkeley, or how did that go?
I did 2 years at UCLA, and then I went to Berkeley, and I graduated from Berkeley. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And obviously that, you had to go through and endure that horrible rape situation. And so throughout that time, would you again, and maybe you've always done this, but you'd use drugs to escape like the internal emotions?
Yeah, I mean, I had no real, I was just trying, it was pain management, which is often what addiction is, right? It was
Yeah.
pain management. I was just, emotionally in a lot of chaos. I had very high anxiety. I had some depression. So I was just sort of trying to survive. And that's the only way that I knew of. And I actually tried therapy in college. I went
Okay.
to like student, like at Berkeley, you can go off campus they're like interns, they're getting their psychology degree or their master's, I guess. And I tried, but because I was doing the drugs and I was really emotionally disconnected in a way. I didn't really make much progress in therapy when I tried when I was in college.
Can I ask you, it's probably not a huge um thing, but what made you go to Berkeley, or why did you transfer from UCLA?
So my boyfriend at the time was, I met in LA, and he was going home, which was, north of Berkeley, Sonoma County. He was going to Sonoma State, and he wanted me to move with him. And I said, well, I'm not going to downgrade not that Sonoma State isn't a perfectly good school, but I was at a top tier school.
Yeah.
And so I wouldn't move there with him, but I transferred to Berkeley, which is, actually a little higher ranked than UCLA, but they're equivalent.
Yeah.
And so that's how I ended up. I followed a boyfriend, but I was smart enough to try to stay at the same academic level as far as the quality of my college.
So you guys met in UCLA?
He wasn't a student, but I met him in LA. Yeah, I met him in
Oh,
LA.
okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. So here's another thing I want to ask you. I want to know your personal beliefs on this. Me working in treatment centers and in my therapy private practice, we sometimes use this term functioning addict. What is your thoughts on that? Because listening to you and how successful you were, because there's people who do way worse than you academically, whatever, who are sober in a way, and they're not as successful on the outside, with the degrees and job or whatever. But you still were able to do all these things while using. So again, I know, long story short,
Yeah.
what is your thought process on functioning like addict or alcoholic?
Well, I will say that the 10 years after college, I was not functional at all. When I started using meth again, my term is that I worked my way down the corporate ladder during those 10 years, because I couldn't hold a job because I was using meth. But the functioning alcohol addict term, a couple things about that. One is that the current definition, the short definition of substance use disorder, is that it's not about what you use or how much you use. It's about, are you using despite negative consequences in your life, right? And also today we talk about substance use disorder because it's a mental health condition, and it is, I emphasize, a mental health condition.
I agree. But there's still many out there that don't want to admit that.
I know. I mean, it's in the DSM, the diagnostic manual, that's therapists and psychiatrists use. But anyway, it's you can have a mild, moderate, or severe substance use disorder, just like you can have a mild, moderate, or severe anxiety, or mild, moderate, or severe depression, right? And so when people talk about functional, sometimes what it really is that person is on the more mild to moderate part of the scale and not necessarily at the severe end. When I take the DSM test, I test at the very severe end because I was shooting meth for a very long time, and my life was completely devastated by it for the last, 10 years. So, I did function, especially academically, during those college years, but that was a relatively short period of time during which I wasn't really doing math much.
Let me ask you, so what degree did you graduate as an undergrad?
History. I was a history major.
Oh, okay. Was that hard to get a job then?
Well, see, so I had always intended to go to law school, and for law school,
So even back then, you want to be a lawyer?
I did. Well, and I actually was accepted. So when I graduated college, I was accepted to Berkeley Law, and I started in the fall. But remember, I started using meth again in January of my senior year. So by September or August, when law school started, I was in no shape. I mean, I went for a while, but I couldn't get there. I couldn't concentrate. I knew I was going to fail out because of my addiction. And so
Yeah.
I withdrew. I mean, I gave back a top 10 law school because of my addiction. It was an agonizing pain for, for the next 10 years. Every time I drove past that building, it was awful, but I had to, because I knew that with my addiction out of control, I was never going to be able to make it through.
Did you again find meth in California? Because you said earlier it was kind of hard in the West Coast, right?
Yeah, when I was in LA, I didn't see meth, but I saw cocaine, which is, a stimulant as well. But when I came to Berkeley, I found meth again. But I found it, before I started using it excessively. I mean, don't get me wrong. Again, I used those other drugs to excess, but meth was really the one for me. It was just biochemically, it was the one that attracted me the most. Some people are sort of like, they'll do anything. And I did other drugs. I've done heroin. I've done all the drugs that existed in my day. I've done, not the new ones like that didn't exist.
Yeah.
But meth, was the one, as I said, I was very committed to meth. Like that was definitely if you would have given me a table of all the drugs, I would have definitely just said, just give me the meth.
Yeah.
And for it's interesting too, because as you can tell, I'm sort of a high energy person, and you'd think that opiates would have attracted me to sort of mellow me out, but they didn't. It was the stimulants.
So I have ADHD, so I've taken medication like Adderall, whatever. And when I go to lectures and when I hear professionals talk, it's odd, but like stimulants bring people like me down. They don't and I don't know if you're similar to like caffeine or stimulants, but I even had an intern director look at me in the middle of a meeting. She's like, Jake, I've never seen so much a person in my life drink as much caffeine as you do and be as calm as you. So stimulants kind of bring me down rather than hype me up. And I don't know if you were similar in a way or.
No, they definitely, I was definitely wound up, but I was doing a lot of crank. I don't know what would have happened if I did a little, I never did a little, right? So I always did a lot, but no, I was definitely wound up. I would stay up for days, at a time, which is, part of the problem with speed, it's a vicious chemical, but it's also when you don't sleep, that has an impact on your brain as well. So it's sort of a double whammy.
I'm sure you know who Joe Rogan is.
Yeah.
He had a gentleman, Carl Hart. I don't know if you ever heard of him before.
I don't recognize it.
He has his PhD in neuropsychology, and they're just talking about people and drug use, and people just tend to like different things. So they're talking about like meth users and stimulant users, and they're saying like those people also there's a joy they get out. They love being revved up. They love being productive and just always in tune. And me personally, like I kind of agree with that in a sense. Like I like being focused and a little wired. Maybe that's why I like caffeine so much. I don't know, but I personally like that feeling that it gives me. And I don't know if you could like relate to any of that or like.
That's interesting. Definitely when the first time I did it, and felt that intense,
euphoric maybe,
yes, that intense euphoria, but that was definitely attractive. On the other hand, with long-term meth use, you don't get that very much, right? Mostly what you're getting is I'm just trying to wake up. I'm trying to level off. I'm trying not to crash. And so that sort of glorious euphoria and that stimulant feeling of the beginning is gone.
Yes.
When you're using it to excess on a regular basis, that's sort of past history.
Another one of Joe Rogan's guests is Jake the Snake Roberts, the wrestler. And again, I don't know if heard about him, but again, another former user. And he has such anger against the public and how they view addiction and people in addiction. He's like, these people think that we like getting fucked up in the morning, drugged up. They think we're having fun. It's like, no, we stopped having fun 20, 30 years ago. We do this just to be normal.
You're right. Some people think like we're out partying. No, it is a miserable existence.
Yes.
The partying days are long gone, long gone. It's a miserable existence. That's why, no one who's thinking logically would lose would do something that has the high cost that, addiction has on people. People lose their jobs. I lost many jobs. They lose their family. They lose their peace of mind. Life is chaos and misery, and you're putting yourself in dangerous situations sometimes. So you're right. Sure, it was fun in the beginning, and there's no reason, don't want to lie about that. It was all fun in the beginning, but it's not fun when you do it to excess for a long period of time. It's miserable.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. So you withdrew from law school. So you had to find a job, right? So you had to find maybe some 9 to 5 to get by.
Yes, yes.
Tell
So
me a
I
little
sort of,
about that. Or yeah.
yeah. So I mean, generally when I worked in during those 10 years was sort of like administrative management. I would work,
Okay.
Doing office management or, some kind of administrative work, work with, with word processing and Excel and things like that, project management things. But every job that I had during those 10 years was less money and less responsibility. And my last job before I went into rehab, when I was 32, with my Berkeley degree and good grades, I was a word processor and I could only hold it for 9 months. Like that was where I was at. And and after that, I was so emotionally depleted. I couldn't even put my resume together again. I mean, it was just down the ladder, down the ladder, down the ladder.
And I'm assuming like your meth use like slowly started increasing every year. You started getting tolerant, right? Or
I mean, it was pretty high for, most of those times. It didn't go up, 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 but it certainly stayed at a very high level for all of that time.
did you still have that same boyfriend throughout the years, or did you guys break up? Or
Yeah, no. So I actually had a good boyfriend after the
a good
violent
boyfriend?
boyfriend. I had a nice boyfriend. And we were together for a long time, but by 32, he was really done with me because, I was not a reliable partner financially. I was, not a good, supportive, partner
Well,
emotionally.
let's go. I'm a big
Yeah.
relationship kind of guy. So you got rid of the toxic guy, right?
Yes.
So how did let's call it the nice guy, right? How did he end up in your life? I'm just curious.
Well, as I said, we met the old-fashioned way. We met in a bar. We met at the
No
pub
online dating. Yeah.
no, those didn't exist. We met in the pub at the Berkeley campus, the Bears
Oh,
Lair. If anyone's a Berkeley grad, we met at the Bears Lair.
okay.
Yeah, he's a lot older, but he was still, he had friends there, and so he was coming up once in a while. But yeah, I mean, he's a good guy. In fact, we are still together. We did make it through.
Okay.
But he was more of a, he would drink and do drugs, but on a casual level, whereas he didn't, until we moved in together, he didn't really appreciate how bad I was. Because he'd only see me maybe
Oh.
on the weekend, and I would always try to, hide how much I was using and make him think, oh yeah, I'm like you. I'm just partying on the weekend. But really, I was not like him at all. And when we moved in together, he gradually started to realize how out of control I was.
Okay.
Yeah. So by 32, he was really done. He was ready to throw me out. And that was one of many reasons that I finally went to rehab.
Yeah, because I was going to ask you. So when all this is going on, what was your relationship like with your mom and your sister back east? Did you still communicate every once in a while, or?
Well, my sister and I are really close. I mean, my sister is only 2 years younger than me, and she also had a substance use problem. We grew up, as I said, we have a war survivor bond, right? And, we're still very close. My mother died a few years ago. I was never close with my mother. I had a relationship with her, but I was never close. And it wasn't about what she had done to me as a child. It was that she never changed. That's just who she was. So I had a relationship, but I had to do a lot of work to emotionally distance from her because she kept trying to drag me into her chaos. And she could still be verbally and even physically abusive. I mean, the last time she really beat on me, I was like 35 years old in a car,
Oh,
when I was
wow.
driving and she was the passenger. So she was not a healthy relationship. So it was, I emotionally separated myself from her, but I still interacted with her to a limited degree.
I do a lot of work with that with my clients on they're trying to get in recovery, their mental health, and they're trying to make things work with their parents where sometimes we'll process that and we're like, we don't know if you can. Like sometimes distancing is the best way because you trying to fix things tends to always cause you stress in a way.
That's right. If she would have been willing to grow and, behave like a real adult, like I
Yeah.
would have been open to having a closer, let's see where this can go. But she wasn't. She was stuck. And look, she was stuck in her misery. She did not have a happy life. She was making a lot of poor choices. She sabotaged her own life over and over. So it wasn't like she was out having fun either, but I had to limit. I just couldn't let myself get dragged into it. I had to
Yeah.
put a boundary around that. Yeah.
So with your mom, do you think it was just more mental health than anything?
Yeah, I
'Cause
mean,
you
she
said she
didn't have
wasn't a drinker, right? She wasn't too
she
much of a.
she wasn't. She had some trauma when she was young, but she just I think she had definitely had some untreated mental health issues, and she never. Well, one time I actually paid for her to go to therapy, and she just lied to the therapist, so it didn't work very
Oh
well.
yeah. Oh wow. Okay. Yeah.
You can only do what you can do. Like you tell your clients, you have to, at some point you have to look at, is this a healthy relationship for me? And if not, I need to figure out what I need it to look like so that it's safe for me.
Yeah. So now at this point where you're 32 and you finally hit the tipping point of I need rehab, or your boyfriend at the time helped make you see that you needed it, or
Yeah, it was sort of like a lot of things in combination. One is I had just lost that word processing job and I couldn't even get it together for a resume. He was really done. I also was having physical problems, from the meth. My body was showing the wear and tear, and I was, emotionally destroyed and feeling very trapped. And so it was sort of like everything together that made me finally say, well, maybe I ought to try rehab.
yeah. Yep. Yep. Were you nervous? Were you scared? What was your mindset like when you're entering the treatment center for the first time?
I mean, I really didn't believe it was possible for me to stop, but I thought maybe I can figure out how to do better, like how to use less. And so it wasn't that I wanted to keep using. It was just that stopping was sort of beyond my imagination. Like I couldn't imagine that at all. But I went in, I was nervous. I remember when my partner, now husband, was driving me there and I said, I don't remember deciding to do this, But he gave me a look like you're doing it,
Yeah.
I was nervous. I was afraid. And I did think that maybe they would try to get me to deal with my trauma history. And I was afraid of that. I didn't know if I could do it without, snapping or committing suicide. Like I was afraid of that.
So then did you graduate your first treatment?
I did, but I will
Okay.
say I also used, I used 3 times in my first 5 months. And I always like to acknowledge that because most people do not have perfect abstinence from day one, right? A few people do, but most of us don't. And so I used twice in rehab and I got away with it. And I used once when I got home. And then, in January of this year, I just had 30 years of continuous sobriety.
Wow,
So
congratulations.
I did one rehab, but I did not do it perfectly.
How did you get away? Because, I mean, our treatment centers, we UA people on a regular basis. So did they just forget to UA you, or did you fake it, or?
They didn't test us unless they suspected that
Oh,
we were
gotcha.
using. Yeah. And I guess I covered it up fairly well. And so, but yeah, it was only if they suspected us. And I was in a longer term program. I was in a 90-day minimum program for women, and I ended up staying for 5 months. So first of all, I didn't have insurance. I didn't have money. So it took me a long time to actually get into treatment. From the day I started looking until the day I actually started, it was about 3 months, including that I was on a wait list for a long time. So, and even today we don't have accessible treatment for a lot of people, right? We act like we do, but we really don't.
No.
So, so it was a while to get in, but it was, but I was interested in the longer term nature of the program. I thought that, that would give me a better chance than just 30 days and home again.
Do you think that's what helped you, is that it was longer so you had more time to work on yourself, or what was some other factors that were really helpful, like good counselors, or?
I think it did help, but I will say there were also problems. So when I went to my rehab, in my mind, I'm going in for medical treatment, right? But when I got there, I quickly found out that they were a 12-step only. Like adamantly and
Mm.
exclusively only 12 steps. They told me there was nothing else. And it's not look, I respect 12 steps and I
Yeah,
support 12 steps when it's the right fit. But
correct.
I gave them multiple reasons why it was not the right fit for me. And all they told me was, you do this or you are going to fail.
Yep.
And so that was a real shocker for me. And so I had to figure out, well, what am I going to do? Because I believe them, right? They're the experts. And so
Yep.
it was a surprise, and I had to think about, how am I going to respond to this?
And it's a damn, excuse my language, shame that a lot of treatment centers are still like that today.
It's true.
It,
It's true. Yeah, I think it's like 30% or something are still 12 step only. And look, I mean, I think 12 steps, people should be told about 12 steps, but you've got to tell people about the other options, multiple pathways. I mean, even in those days, there were options, but I didn't find them until I got home.
well, and you have so many, even today, I don't know what it's like in California, but in Minnesota, like old school counselors who that's how they recovered was 12 steps, and they have the hard note, not all of them, but good chunk of them. I'm sorry, people. This is just my experience when working with them. Still have that concept. If you don't do it this way, you're done.
I know, but the truth is the evidence shows the opposite, right? And to me, if you're going to be providing what is a really medical treatment, you need to be educated about the current, information that we have that's
Mhm.
evidence-based, and that isn't evidence-based. I mean, again, it is a good fit for some people. Some people do really well, and I'm really happy, and I support them, and I support 12 steps being
Yep.
provided as one of the options. And, I don't have a problem with that. But I mean, for example, there's been a study, the Peer Alternative Study, compared the effectiveness of AA, Life Ring Secular Recovery, Smart Recovery, and Women for
Yep.
Sobriety, and found they're all equally effective. So 12 steps isn't better. It's really going to be about what's right for you. I mean, even SAMHSA recognizes that the right treatment program should be individualized to the person. That's what the evidence shows.
Yeah, like me as a counselor, I'll always encourage people to try new things. So if I had a hypothetical client who went to some AA meetings or NA meetings and felt like it wasn't a good fit, I wouldn't shame them for it. I'm like, well, you tried. Let's find something else that might work for you. Like that's where I like to be is open-minded, where again, not all therapists are counselors.
That's right. I mean, I think there's value in, like, for example, so my recovery is really a combination. Today we would call it a patchwork plan, or Lifeline calls it a personal recovery plan. So I attended 12-step meetings, and I read the AA Big Book, and I read the NA text, but even in 1994, when I got home from rehab, I will emphasize to the younger people, there's no Google, okay? But
Yeah.
I got in my car and I drove to the library. And even in 94, there were options for me. And I went to Women for Sobriety and Smart's parent organization and LifeRing's parent. And I read all those books and went to all those meetings, and I built a plan that worked for me. And I do think it's okay to tell a newcomer, here's what I did. Here's why I think it worked, but it's going to be in the nature of, for your consideration. Here's some information for you to think about. Not you have to follow my path, but there's still value in sharing what worked for us. That can be useful. I mean, when I was trying to find different strategies and techniques, I would listen to 12-step people. I would listen to anybody who had, who was successful. What are you doing? How did you handle this? How do you handle that? I mean, they're all good ideas. And then I get to filter them for which ideas do I think will work for me.
I also do like the fellowship aspect of it too, the community support that you do get from that.
But, the other groups have this community support too, right? And so that
True.
isn't uniquely 12 steps. That isn't uniquely 12 steps.
Some of them tend to think that it is only.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, although it is true that in some parts of the country, if you want to go to a face-to-face meeting, maybe there is only 12 steps in some parts of the country, face-to-face. But now all the groups are online. And so, you can do, and the other thing is you can do both. Like I'm on the board for LifeRing and I'm on the board for She Recovers, and She Recovers. I think about 30% of our members also do 12 steps. And we support that. You can do both. You don't have to reject one in order to add in some ideas from the other.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So taking me back to your mindset of like, okay, you graduated treatment. Were you like confident, or were you like nervous getting back out to the world and starting over again? Or what was it like?
I mean, I felt ancient. I was 32. I knew
Okay. Yep.
I had wasted my education. I had an embarrassing resume.
So
I
the
mean, it was,
shame or guilt increased in a sense?
I had to face it, right? I had
Okay.
to face it in a new
Like you were
way,
driving
right?
by the law school every day,
Well,
right?
there was that, but also I had to look for a job. And I will say that one of the things, I mean, a couple things. One is professionally we'll talk about, but we should talk about, I also had to deal with my trauma. That was the other big
Yes.
part of my recovery. But from the job side, when I got home, I mean, I was not ready to leap into a full-time career job. Plus, I wouldn't
Yes.
have gotten hired for that job because my resume was too bad. And so my first professional goal when I got home from treatment was let's not get fired again. Like that was my
There we go.
professional
Good
goal.
expectations. I love it.
And my first job was a low-level, part-time, temporary administrative job because for me to get used to getting up every day and going to work
Yes.
on time and staying all the hours and doing a good job and doing it the next day and the next, I hadn't been doing that. I didn't know how. I sort of needed to get that practice
Yep.
before I was ready for a full-time, permanent job. And so I had to start where I was. I had to start where I was and move from there.
Okay. So, okay, good. So then you did that for a while. You were consistent, and then did you move from part-time to full-time in the same position?
So I moved from that temporary job. My second job was a permanent, full-time, mid-level administrative job.
Nice.
And then my third job was a supervisory job at a larger company, like an administrative supervisor. And I got a promotion there. And then at 6.5 years sober, I went to Berkeley Law for real.
Yes,
For
I
real.
love it.
So it wasn't a light switch. It took me those 6 years to be ready to actually even think about trying law school again after my prior failure. It was
Yeah.
really scary for me. But I did it at 6.5 and I was 39. I'll emphasize as well. I was 39 when I started law school. So it was not young, but I also felt like at 39, I either needed to do it or admit I was never going to do it. Like I was sort of
Yep.
at that point. Right.
Yep.
And so I did. I went to, graduated from Berkeley Law, when I was 42.
And then you're still with your boyfriend and obviously now husband still at the time?
Yes, I was.
What's his name, by the way? I want to get his name. What's his name?
His name is Doc. His name is Doc. Now,
Doc. All right, Doc.
Doc and I did a lot of couples counseling though. I mean, when I was in
Yes.
rehab, you know how they do those family sessions in rehab with
Yep.
he was telling the therapist, I think it's too late. I think she's burned this bridge. I don't, I'm too angry. But when he did let me come home and sort of see what was going to happen. And then we went into couples counseling for like 2 years. And that was really necessary for us to get, for us to heal the relationship and start from a good place, so we did a lot of work.
So you said the treatment center was purely 12 steps. So did you feel like you did any mental health related work at the treatment center in a sense?
I mean, we had, again, like an intern therapist, right,
Okay,
who
yep.
did a little bit. But when I got home, I always knew that my trauma was underneath my drug use. And so when I got home, I looked for and found a therapist with trauma expertise. And so I did individual therapy for 3 years. And then she put me in group therapy with women who had trauma histories. And I was in that group for 5 more years. And that was a friggin' eye opener for me. So, I mean, it took me longer to get my trauma under pretty good control, which for me, it turns out she correctly diagnosed me with PTSD. And for me, it showed up as severe anxiety. So it was definitely a challenge, but my substance use disorder was under control a lot faster than my mental health. It took me longer to get to a good place. I mean, I was improving, better, but it took me a lot longer to get my mental health to a good place than it did for me to really stop craving drugs and feeling like my sobriety was solid. Yeah.
So sometimes in my groups too, we talk about the power of stigma on the community, the person. Did you ever have any fear or concern, like going into law school, how your history may affect you getting in or how you're looked at by people and so forth?
I mean, definitely I didn't tell employers about my history. It was something I really wouldn't wanted them to find out. When I was applying to law school, I looked up the rules because, you have to get a license from the bar, right? And The California bar, they don't say, have you ever done drugs? They ask, have you even had a drug problem, or maybe have you used illegal drugs for 5 years? But by the
Oh,
time I was before the bar, I had 10 years sobriety.
yep.
So I could I could tell the truth and say no. So I knew that, I didn't have to tell them. On the other hand, I was arrested once, but I got it expunged. And also I was only convicted of a disorderly person offense. It wasn't like it was a felony
Mm-hmm.
or something. So I was a little nervous if they did a background check, would they find it? But I was pretty sure. It was so old. And
Yeah.
I mean, my arrest was in 1979 and I became a lawyer in
Mm,
2003. Like the gap was huge.
yeah.
But also I had been sober so long that I didn't have to tell them about it.
Okay. Tell me, how was your law school experience the second time around, interacting with your fellow students and professors?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm older, right? And I'm in a
Yeah.
solid marriage. And so it was actually
Okay.
easier for me, I think, than the younger students, because the younger students, they're still like getting in arguments with their boyfriends, or
Oh
they're getting,
yeah.
sort of emotional, or they're trying to party and do law school. I mean, don't get me wrong. Berkeley law students are serious law students, but
Yeah.
my life was in a very calm place by the time I started law school. I also had been, I had that discipline habit from having worked for those 6.5 years. I was in a good place as far as meeting my commitments and my responsibilities and planning ahead and managing projects. Law school to me was sort of a project management project, like how do I efficiently handle this huge volume of work in a timely fashion? So in some ways I was in a better life situation and a better
Hmm.
emotional place than the younger students.
Did they ever look up to you or come to you for advice as like a older sister or like a older friend for advice in any way?
That it is interesting. So Berkeley, 10% of the class was 30 and over, but even in
Okay.
that group, I was a little on the higher side. But yeah, I mean, definitely some of the students would ask me, relationship questions or
Yep.
things. Oh, you're married,
Oh,
can
yep.
you give me some advice or that kind of thing. But also a lot of the students, when word got out that I was getting good grades, and they want to know how do you do this, right? How do you, what's your study techniques? How do you tackle your classes? How do you approach the subject matter? So I got a lot of academic questions.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so amazing. Now, again, a deeper question. I hope like it doesn't make you too uncomfortable. Like, did you ever feel comfortable about telling anyone about your past?
So I mean, if people became like a real friend, I might tell
Hmm.
them, some things, but it was always at sort of a higher end level, right? And definitely for work, the first time I ever told work was when I was a judge, and I was appointed a judge. I will emphasize, when I was 20 years sober, I was appointed a federal administrative law judge. So it was 20 years sober.
Yeah.
Um,
That's
but when I joined the board of Life Ring Secular Recovery, and when I joined the board, I had to run it through ethics because I was a judge. And so that was the first time. But even then I just said, I'm going to be on this board. I forget, 23 years of sobriety. And I didn't say what drug it was. They probably assumed it was alcohol.
hmm
I didn't say one way or the other. And so that was the first time I disclosed there. But friends, I mean, most of my friends knew that I had a history of meth addiction. Most of them knew I had an abuse history, a sexual assault history. But
hmm
the book, for example, gave them a lot more details. Like most of them didn't know the level of detail, anywhere near the level of detail that's in the
Yeah.
book.
Yeah. Tell me the moment when you graduated from law school, and did you walk then and you had your gown? And
Yes, yes.
I can't imagine, but I'm just going to ask you, when you did it and you looked at the crowd, what was that like?
I mean, it was really rewarding, to have gotten back something like that I had given up because of my addiction, to have actually be graduating from Berkeley Law
Yeah.
after, such a horrible first, effort. And so it was a very joyful day. And I will say it was a very joyful day. I felt like, I mean, don't get me wrong, still aware of how many years I had lost, and I could have
Yep.
been a lawyer in, uh, 1990 instead of 2003, but this is the way it played out for me. So there's always a little bit of that lost time feeling, but overall it was a very joyful day.
And I never asked you, what part of law did you end up getting into?
So when I graduated, I worked at a big law firm. And
Mm-hmm.
so in Silicon Valley, which is where I lived, and I did complex business litigation and business class action work. And then I did that. And then I went to work for the federal government. I did class action work for the federal government. And then I was appointed a federal administrative law judge. So that was sort of the trajectory. And I'm retired now. So I was a judge for 5.5 years, and I took early retirement in 2020. And being retired is why I can talk openly now, right? I don't have to worry about professional ramifications. So it's really a very freeing time in my life to be able to sort of not have little boxes about, I say this to this group of people and this to that group of people. I can say anything to anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And also I try to use my story for a good purpose, right? To help educate people about addiction and recovery, and to try to reduce stigma. And it's why I publicly owned that I shot meth. You know, I really wanted to show that even when you're in, in that misery, and shooting meth in society is really viewed harshly, right? I mean, very harshly. But I really wanted to stand up and say, I shot meth. And look, I have a happy and productive life, and I even became a judge. So let's not dismiss the people that are struggling in that way. Let's, view them as human beings deserving of our help.
Yeah. Yeah, again, your story is, I feel like it's just one in a million, just because I'm not like, when I first saw the title of your book, and I had the powerful feeling like anything is possible. And again, like when you made this book about your life, what kind of message did you want to send to the world and to the audience? Because that was the message I kind of got. But did you have a particular message?
I mean, I was thinking of a couple things. When I started thinking about the memoir, which was when I was appointed a judge, because it was sort of a reflection time, right? Like, how did I go from shooting meth to becoming a judge? But I really started thinking about, could my story be of use? And so, a couple things is I started reading memoirs, and I felt like most of them don't show where the addiction came from. And so that's why the beginning of my book is about my childhood, because I wanted to try to help America, or, my readers, understand the connection between child abuse and other trauma and the likelihood that you're going to develop a substance use disorder. Sort of put that plant that idea more than I think it is. But also the last third of my book is recovery. It's about the first 3 years, because a lot of memoirs sort of jump at the end. I went to a couple meetings and everything was great. And it's like, well, that's not how recovery works. And so I wanted to show a more realistic example, but also I didn't do it the 12-step way. And the memoirs that I read were all 12-step memoirs. So I wanted to show an example of building a more individual recovery plan and what that could look like. But yes, it was also about trying to reduce stigma, trying to increase understanding, and trying to reassure people that are still struggling, but also their friends and family, that even if their family member is, 32 and not sober yet, it doesn't mean that they can't find a path forward and have a good life.
Amen. That's very well said. Again, Mary Beth, it was such an amazing honor and pleasure having you on my show. I learned so much from you. I know my audience did. However, if my audience members do want to get a hold of you, is there a particular way they can make contact with you via LinkedIn or an email? Or
Sure. So my website is junkietojudge.com. And I have, for example, written opinion pieces for the Wall Street Journal and the LA Times and Recovery Today, and those are all there. But people can also message me through my website. So if you have a question or a speaking opportunity, I answer every message. So that's junkietojudge.com. And then, yes, I am on LinkedIn. I'm also on X/Twitter at Mary Beth O_, where I actually provide the new studies that come out, articles about substance use and recovery and my thoughts. And then the book, From Junkie to Judge, One Woman's Triumph Over Trauma and Addiction, is on Amazon, but also all the usual online sites, and your bookstore either has it or can get it.
Absolutely. And to all my audience members, all that information will be on links in my show notes, so it'll be one click away. Again, Mary Beth, it was truly a blessing to have you on. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
I again want to thank Mary Beth for being an awesome and amazing special guest on my show. I really appreciate her time and her knowledge. I just want to thank all of my listeners for your support, and just to inform everyone that the information expressed in this episode was not meant to be taken as therapeutic advice. If you do find yourself struggling with any type of mental health or addiction issues, please seek the care of a medical doctor or a licensed mental health therapist. And if anyone has any further questions for me, you can reach me at my email address, behaviorhealthintegration121@gmail.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn at Jacob Minig, where you will find more educational posts on psychotherapy, trauma, and addiction. And finally, you can follow me on my website, which is behaviorhealthintegration.org. I also want to inform everyone that there is a great new device out there called Calmigo. It's a breathing device meant to control and manage your breathing rates and the depth of your breathing as you inhale and exhale to, again, help relieve any type of anxiety and stress-like symptoms. And if you do put the BHI podcast into the promo code, you get $30 off this amazing device. It is a once-in-a-lifetime deal, and you will not be disappointed. All right, everyone, until next time, have a good day. Bye.